Hello, everybody, and welcome finally to the first of my Oscar winner prediction videos for this year. So, this has been a long time coming, obviously. I know a lot of you are going to be very excited for these, but this year, I gotta say, has got to be one of the craziest Oscar years, maybe of my entire predicting career, because first of all, because of the wildfires, so many things have been delayed. Usually by now, we would know the Critics' Choice Award winners, but those are happening tonight. And so it's going to take a little while before we fully know everything. It's going to take a while before all the information comes in. And even when they do, a lot of these award shows voted some time ago, and maybe the information might be a little bit out of date because a lot has changed in the past month. Amelia Perez, I did a whole video about this, but I did it right before the controversy about Carlos Sofia Gascon's tweets came up. And now that those have happened, I think the movie's chances to win picture are completely dead, but I don't know what else it could win, and I definitely don't know what's winning Best Picture now. There's so much uncertainty, so much more than we're used to at this point in the race. So where do I start? Well, I have to start these prediction videos with the category that I am the most confident. My prediction is not going to change between now and the Oscars. And this year, that category is Best Costume Design. This, to me, costume design is kind of a weak category this year. There's one movie that's head and shoulders above the competition. And outside of that, not a ton to get super excited about. Dune Part 2 was the big snub here. I'm really surprised that that one didn't make it, considering that there are a lot of costumes in the new movie that were not in the original. Also, Beetlejuice I thought could be a contender because of Colleen Atwood. But these are the 5 films that we're left with, so let's not waste any time and get right to them. Fifth most likely to win is A Complete Unknown. Costumes designed by Ariane Phillips, who is on her 4th Oscar nomination. She was previously up for Walk the Line, W.E., and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So she is the most nominated costume designer here, and she has not won, which normally would be a big help. However, the costumes in this movie, while they're not necessarily bad, they're not necessarily flashy either. Obviously, Bob Dylan is a real person, so there's a lot of recreations of the clothes that he used to wear, but it's not like he was the most flashy of pop stars. A lot of the costumes in the film worn by him and the other characters are pretty, I don't want to say standard, but they're not the sort of thing that pop. They don't make you go, ooh, wow, look at those costumes. The costumes blend into the background almost, which there is something to be said by that. Again, I don't think that this is bad work. I think the costume designer did exactly what was required of her for this movie. But I don't know if this is necessarily work that we need to be nominating for an Oscar, especially over something more flashy like a Dune Part 2 or Beetlejuice. And I know that some might be tempted to go for it just because the movie is such a big deal, but I really don't think that's going to happen. I think looking at all of the 5 nominees, these costumes are the least flashy to me, and I would be very, very surprised to see it win. I think the nomination is just there to show us support for the movie. 4th most likely to win is Conclave. So costume designer of this film is Lissy Crystal, who is on her 2nd nomination after Anonymous. These costumes are a little bit showier than the costumes for A Complete Unknown, but still not that showy. I mean, the costumes that Ralph Fiennes and the other Cardinals in the movie wear do stand out. They are recognizable, and they are pretty faithful recreations of the real costumes worn by the real Cardinals. However, herein lies the problem. Unlike A Complete Unknown, Conclave is a contemporary film, and all of the costumes that the Cardinals wear in the movie are pretty much exact duplicates of what the real-life Cardinals are currently wearing. So, obviously they didn't use the exact clothes, but it couldn't have been too hard to recreate the costumes for the movie. And so, I don't know if there was that much creativity involved in this process. Now, again, that's not to say that the costume designer did a bad job. I think this is exactly what was required for this movie. And there is something to be said that even if the costumes don't stand out that much, you did your job, you did what the movie was required of you, and I don't know how difficult it must have been to recreate these pre-existing costumes, so good on you, I guess. But because there's not as much creativity that went into it, I can't see it winning over the other nominees. Third most likely to win is Gladiator 2. So there are two credited costume designers for this film, David Crossman and Janty Yates. Both of them are previous nominees for Napoleon, and Janty Yates is actually a previous winner for the original Gladiator. So this is a movie that was supposed to do a lot better than it ended up doing. Being the follow-up to a movie that won Best Picture, there were a lot of very high hopes that this could be a massive contender across the board, and it ended up being considered a disappointment. However, if you are going to nominate this movie for one Oscar, then costume design is definitely the appropriate category to do that in. The costumes in this movie are very flashy, very showy, particularly everything that is worn by the Hamish Linklater and Joseph Quinn characters. Very, very bright and flashy, and really everything that you want to see. Maybe it's not the most historically accurate, but that's never been an issue with the Gladiator movies. So it works, it stands out. However, the reason why I don't think it can win is because this is the film's only nomination. Clearly, this is a movie that was expected to do a lot better and really missed the mark overall. And this nomination for costume design is really just a consolation prize for the movie. I can see some people being impressed by it because the costumes definitely do stand out more than Conclave and A Complete Unknown, but I just don't think the movie is well liked enough to go all the way. Also, the original Gladiator won in this category, and there could be discussions about, are the costumes really that different to reward another win? Clearly this movie is not as well liked as the original, and I just don't see it going all the way. The nomination is the reward. Second most likely to win is Nosferatu. So this is actually the first nomination for Linda Muir, who is a frequent collaborator with Robert Eggers. And the costumes in this movie are pretty good. Robert Eggers, as many of us know, is a stickler for historical accuracy. So there was a lot of effort that went into making these costumes not too flashy, but also very practical, very realistic to the times. And the costumes really do help ground you in the time period that the movie is set in, which is good. Also, this movie is, while it's not a Best Picture nominee, it is more liked than Gladiator 2, for example. And it got 4 below-the-line nominations. And I could even see it winning in a different category that I'll get to later, but costume design, I just don't know. I do think it's number 2. I do think it has more. It's going to get more votes than the previous 3 movies. But I don't know. I think while the costumes in this movie are good, they're not the most extravagant, which again is part of the point. You could argue that the Gladiator 2 costumes are more extravagant than this one, and I could have had that one a little bit higher. But I think this one is going to get more votes simply because it's the better liked movie. But I think when you look at the competition, Nosferatu does make sense as the number 2. I think it is going to get the second most amount of votes. And yet, number 1 most likely to win this award is Wicked. I think this movie is going to win by a pretty broad margin. Forgot to mention the costume designer here is Paul Tazewell, who is on his second nomination after previously doing West Side Story. He also famously did the costume design for Hamilton on stage, and he's credited as saying that his very first costume designer job was for his high school production of The Wiz. So he obviously has a connection with Oz, and the costumes in this movie are pretty extraordinary. Obviously, you have Ariana Grande as Glinda, who has very, very vibrant pink fluffy dresses. You also have Elphaba, which is a little bit less stylish, but do still say a lot about her character. This is a fantasy movie with predominantly women as cast, but there's also the Shiz University uniforms. A lot of the men in this movie are very sharply dressed. The wizard is dressed nicely. Fiyero is dressed nicely. Everyone in this movie is dressed very, very nicely, and there are so many very intricate costumes that had to be created to really bring this world to life. And the costumes not only pay tribute to the original Wicked Broadway musical, which won the Tony for costume design, but also the original 1939 Wizard of Oz film, which was nominated for costume design but lost to Gone with the Wind. So there's a very real legacy that's being brought through with these costumes. The costumes are so showy, so much showier than any of the other movies, even more showy than Gladiator, I would argue. And this movie is much more loved than Gladiator. It is a Best Picture nominee. You don't always have to be a Best Picture nominee to win in this category, but it doesn't hurt. And the movie is so well liked across the board, they're definitely going to want to give it something, and this is by far the easiest category to reward Wicked with an Oscar. So I do think Paul Tazewell is going to walk away with an Oscar for Wicked. After winning the Tony for Hamilton, he's halfway to an EGOT, and I think, yeah, there's no denying, there's no arguing it's going to be anything else. I think this is pretty cut and dry. Wicked is taking home the Oscar for costume design. So, thank you very much for joining me. Tune in next time when I will be taking a look at the category of Best Adapted Screenplay. See you then.